So today we're going to read Chapter 6 from Chains by Laurie Halse Anderson. Wednesday, May 29th, 1776. "This way," the boy said as the carriage turned the corner. He headed away from the waterfront quick, without looking back. I picked up my skirts and ran after him. "Please slow down," I called. He pushed ahead. I tried to follow, and we hurried past the biggest houses that I have ever seen, past shops and taverns and manufactories, past city folk walking like their shoes were on fire. But I could not move fast enough, as I was losing sight of him in the crowd. "You best slow down," I called. Folks about me muttered and frowned. The boy stopped in front of a tavern and waited, his mouth twisted with irritation. I trotted up to him, so angry that a steam came off the top of my head. "You offer to help and then you abandon me?" The words spilled out of my mouth. "Where are we going? And why did you send me to buy water? Don't people know how about digging wells?" He waited for a moment, then said, "You sure ask a lot of questions." "You give dull-witted answers," I shot back. "Country girls are slow-moving, vexing creatures," he said. "You're the vexatious one," I said, running off and leaving me like that. We stood glaring at each other, him with his arms crossed over his chest, me trying to catch my breath, and inside the tavern a woman argued with a man about a leaking cask of beer. On the street corner, an army officer yelled orders at 4 soldiers building a barricade out of logs, large stones, and a barrow full of dirt. My heart finally slowed, my brow cooled off, and I wanted to give him a nasty pinch. Fool! I should have kept my temper. Now he would truly leave, and I would be lost in this horrible place, and there was no telling what Madame Lockton might do to Ruth in my absence. Apologies did not come natural to me, but I had no choice. "I am sorry I spoke so rudely." He said. "I guess I'm sorry I caused you a fright, Country." "Thank you, and my name is Isabel, not Country." "Apologies again, Miss Country Isabel," he said with a smile. "I should have explained before. We're heading up to what folks call the tea water pump. Rich people get their water from there because it tastes the best. But first I must deliver a message for my master. Stay here." He ducked inside a stationery shop briefly and came out carrying a small parcel wrapped in brown paper and 2 fresh rolls steaming hot with butter oozing from the middles. "Follow, this way." We walked the length of an alley to a small courtyard. Someone had planted a garden there, and the first plants had come up: peas, cabbage, and pennyroyal. Curzon handed me a roll and pointed at a tree stump. Figured you'd want to sit and eat a bite." "I have no money," I said. "I can't take this. It costs me nothing. The baker's daughter likes the lad who works at the press. She brings him extra breads and pies. Go ahead, eat." Half of my roll disappeared in one bite. It was the first decent food I'd had since Jenny's kitchen. Curzon watched me without saying a word. When I licked the butter off my fingers, he gave me his roll. "I ate a large breakfast," he said. My pride wanted to turn it down, but my belly was stronger. The second roll vanished as quick as the first. "Thank you," I said when I was finished. "I'm beholden to you for that. Can we go now? I need to get back to my sister." He set the package on the tree stump. The littler one. She's your sister? That's why you took the blow meant for her, isn't it?" A breeze ran through the courtyard, fluttering the leaves of a young pea plant and blowing cool across my cheek where Madame had struck me. "She needs watching over." He nodded. "How long have you been with the Locktons?" 3 days. Curzon listened carefully as I told how Madame and her husband bought us. "Lockton is a dirty loyalist," he said when I finished. "Loyalist or rebel, I don't care." I stood up from the stump and brushed the back of my skirt clean. "Can we go?" He nodded, picked up the package, and led me out of the alley. "You feel beholden to Lockton." "Pardon? He's going to feed you and your sister, give you a place to sleep. He can order you sold, beat, or hung if the mood takes him. That could make a person feel a kind of loyalty." I stopped considering this. "Someday I'm going to find that lawyer and Miss Mary's will, and that'll free us. Until then, we need to eat, work, and stay together. So yes, I'm loyal to Lockton." The words tasted bitter. Being loyal to one who owned me gave me prickly thoughts, like burrs trapped in my shift, pressing into my skin with every step. We paused at the corner while a soldier drove a cart filled with barrels down the street, and after we crossed, Curzon spoke so quiet I had to lean in to catch his words. "You might be better served if you placed your loyalties with us." "Who is us?" "My master and those he serves, the rebels, the Congress. We're fighting for freedom from people just like Lockton." "I'm just fighting for me and Ruth. You can keep your rebellion. How much longer till this pump? He stood beside the barricade. The brim of his hat cast his face in shadow. You might hear things at the Lochtons' house. What kind of things? Useful things. The things that might help you get to that lawyer and your freedom. I frowned. I don't like riddles. Chalk plain. New York is a ball tossed between the loyalists and patriots, he said, scratching at the scar on his face. Right now, the patriots hold it. So? Lochton has returned to our cause. Why don't they arrest him? It's not that simple. Plenty of folks hereabouts haven't decided which side they favor. One day they cheer for General Washington, the next day they toast to the king. Putting Lochton in jail could turn them against us. He started walking again, nattering on about plots and conspiracies and battle plans and secrets, but the truth be told, my mind drifted. I cared not a fig for politics, nor soldiers. I was just worried about my sister, and my cheek still really hurt. Will you help us or not? He stared at me intent, and I tried to figure out his meaning. It slowly dawned. You want me to spy? I asked. Are you funny in the head? Do you know what they would do to me? Shh, he warned. Keep your voice down. You just have to listen and alert me if you hear anything important. You won't be in any danger. You are a crazy fool. How do you know I won't tell Master Lochton you sought me out? Wouldn't matter if you did. He knows he's under suspicion. Might do you some good, bring you favor in his eyes if you told him. But it would be a mistake. Lochton's not going to reward you. The Patriots can. Reward? Colonel Reagan is the officer in charge. He could send you back to Rhode Island, maybe help you find that lawyer and his papers. I pondered this. Was he lying? Could I trust this strange boy filled with war and secrets? What would Mama do? I shook my head. It's too dangerous. I'm going to have enough to do with chores and watching Ruth and keeping her out of Madam's way. All you have to do is listen for talk of the king's troops. See, there you go again, proving you're a fool. They're not going to say anything in front of me. Listen, you're a small black girl country, he said bitterly. You're a slave, not a person. They're going to say anything in front of you because... they're going to say anything in front of you they won't say in front of the white servants, because you don't count to them. It happens all the time to me. There was truth in his words, hard truth, a hammer striking stone. If you hear something, come to Bellingham's house in the night, across from where the ship docked this morning. I sleep in the shed room. Tap on the window and I'll awake. I touched my cheek. I couldn't. I shouldn't. I can't, I said. I promised Mama I'd take care of Ruth. And now, can we please go? That's the end of chapter 6. So now Isabel's faced with a really difficult decision. Does she spy on the Lochtons in hopes of gaining her freedom? A very dangerous mission that she would be on. So she really has a lot of thinking to do, and you can see how Curzon already is playing a role in her life and her future for Ruth and Isabel. So we'll continue reading chapter 7 next. Thank you. So today we're going to read chapter 7 of Chains by Laurie Halse Anderson. Wednesday, May 29th, 1776. It was near a mile from the tea water pump back to them to the island to the Lochtons' house, a long journey carrying heavy buckets that stretched my arms into sore ribbons. I forgot the pain when Curzon stopped, pointed and said, "There it is." The house was made of blocks of cream-colored stone and was wider from the side to side than Jenny's tavern. I tilted my head and counted 4 floors, each with big windows facing the street. There were balcony railings on the roof. There were even windows peeking out at foot level, cellar windows which meant 5 stories in one house. A curtain moved. "Make haste," Curzon said. "If you value your life, don't use the front door." The sun caught the ring in his ear and blazed as he tipped his hat to me. I hurried through the side gate, and the mansion was twice as long as it was wide. A large plot stretched behind it with a cistern, a privy, a poor excuse for a garden, and at the far end, a carriage house and a small stable. "You there!" I turned around. A tiny woman wearing a green calico skirt, a nut-brown bodice, and a dingy shift stood in the open door to the kitchen. She tossed a pan of dirty water onto the flagstone and pushed a strand of graying hair out of her eyes with the back of her hand. "What's your business here?" she demanded. I'm Isabel. I'm the... Master Lochton brought us from Newport." The anger drained out of her face. "Oh, you're the new girl, gone for the water. Lord help us, did you get lost?" "I don't think so. Curzon..." "Oh, funny little boy with the ring in his ear." She shook her head. "That's Bellingham's boy. You better stay away from him. Bring in that water. We've a world of work to do." Her name was Becky Barry. Though it'll be mud if I don't pull this house together in a flash, she said as she poured the fresh water into a pot and swung it over the kitchen fire. She barely stopped talking long enough to draw a breath. 8 months. They vanished to Boston for 8 months, and then they show up with no warning and wanting tea. Tea! I could get tarred and feathered for brewing tea, she said. She turned around. Her face marked her as being of middle years, dotted with freckles and pox scars. Her chin was narrow and pointed like a shovel, and her smile was missing several teeth. The rules here are simple. Do what Madam says. You know where the tea pump is. You'll go up there every day. You'll go with me to the market when I need you to. Don't go north of Chambers Street or wandering off past Mulberry, lest Madam writes you a pass. You don't want people thinking you're trying to run. That don't work here. You been a housemaid before? I shook my head. We lived on a farm. Pardon me, ma'am. Miss Becky, can you tell me where my sister is? Your what? Her eyebrows went up. Oh, the little girl. I nodded. Ruth. She's slow, ain't she? I didn't dare explain until I figured out what kind of person Becky was. She's good-natured. Becky walked into the pantry crowded with shelves of crockery. Not going to cause me any trouble, is she? Never, I lied. Well, where is she, ma'am, please? Becky came out carrying a varnished silver teapot and a stack of china cups and plates. Madam Lockton told me to give the little one a bath and feed her. She went back to the pantry and shouted a little so I could hear her. She's in the privy, your sister, I mean, not the madam. I let a long breath and stepped towards the door. Becky came back carrying a small chest. Where do you think you're going? To fetch Ruth. Oh, no, you're not, Becky said. Madam wants her outside peeling potatoes, and you're to work in here with me. But through the window, I watched Ruth leave the privy and walk straight to the bench. She hopped up, pulled a potato from the sack next to her, and started peeling with a small knife, her feet kicking in the air under the bench. She looked like a little bird on a twig. I relaxed some. She was safe and happy enough. Becky brushed at the cobwebs clinging to her skirt. But nothing. If Madam sees you idling and jawing out there, there's going to be the devil to pay. She can be a very hard mistress to slaves. I waited for her to say more, but she shook her head once and handed me a broom. Me, I see things different. You do what you're told, we're going to get along fine. Now follow me and pay attention. Becky led me down a narrow corridor to the front entry hall, where a grand staircase curled upwards. A tall grandfather clock sat at the foot of the stairs, pecking away at the hour, as if a crow trapped inside were trying to break loose. The walnut linen chest that Madam had fussed over at the dock was now set in front of the clock. Opposite the chest was the door that led to the street. 2 other doors with tarnished brass pulls faced the hall. Becky pointed to the door on the right. That's where the master's library is. You should never step in there without permission. He doesn't like people touching his things. A library with books? And maps and papers and all a jumble. It's a wonder he can find anything in there. This is a good parlor where I'm going to serve the tea. The drawing room is upstairs. We'll clean up there later. Open them windows. The room was crowded with furniture draped with cloth. The air was thick and stale, and I pulled aside the heavy drapes and stretched on my toes to push up the window. The sills were dusty and the corners were spun thick with spiderwebs studded with dead flies. I went to open the next window as Becky laid out the rag on each sill. Wipe down the windows and sweep the floor before you uncover the furniture, she said. The second window was stubborn, and I pushed as hard as I could until it suddenly flew up and I near lost my balance. Becky grabbed me before I tumbled outside. Easy on, she said as I regained my balance. You're no good to me with a cracked head. 3 soldiers wearing homespun shirts and carrying muskets walked past the window, laughing loudly. I wish they'd all go home, Becky muttered. Soldiers is a nuisance. You don't like the rebels, I said. Becky put a finger to her lips and pulled me away from the window. Listen to me good. Them that feeds us, she pointed upstairs, they're loyalists. Tories. That means that we're Tories too. Understand? Yes, ma'am, but I hesitated, not sure if I was allowed to ask questions. But Master Lockton claimed to be a patriot on the docks. Becky fought to open the final window. A cool breeze flowed through the room and stirred the dust. He was faking to protect his skin. Some folks switched back and forth. One day they're for the king, the next are all liberty and freedom, huzzah. A tribe of Mr. Facing both ways. That's what you're going to find in New York. But you know what never changes? I shook my head. No, what? Madam wants lemon cakes with her tea. She's terribly fond of cakes. Is Madam? Lady Clarissa Seymour is coming to hear all the news from Boston. A lady? A royal lady? Becky laughed. Close enough. She's the master's aunt. She's rich and old and owns lands in 3 countries. The master hopes to inherit the lot when she dies, so they treat her like the queen herself. To her face, at least. The grandfather clock in the hall bonged loudly 4 times, startling us both. Wretched clock, Becky muttered. I'm off to the baker. Finish sweeping in here and dusting, and after that polish the teapot and bring in the firewood. Don't stop moving, whatever you do. So that was the end of chapter 7, and we learned in this chapter, basically, we get to see what the house is about, and we get to meet Becky, who's the housekeeper, who Isabel will be closely working with. Isabel gives her a little bit of the rules of the land, about listening to Miss Lockton and following the rules because she can be a harsh mistress. Also on the fact that as long as they're in a Tory house, they're supporting the Tories and not the rebels, that people do go back and forth, and that Mr. Lockton does cover his skin when he needs it. So we're going to find out what happens next when we read chapter 8. Thank you. Chapter 8 of Chains by Laurie Halse Anderson. The day started early in the Lockton kitchen. Since Becky lived in a boarding house on Oliver Street, it fell to me to wake first and build the fire. She did proper cooking, and I did near everything else, like washing the pots and plates and beating eggs till my arms fell off from Adam's almond jumbles and plum cakes with icing. If not in the kitchen, I was removing colonies of spiders, polishing tables and chairs, or sweeping up a mountain of dust. I saved the cobwebs, twisting them around a rag and storing them in a pallet in the cellar. Cobwebs were handy when a person had bloody clot. Madam explained every time she saw me. Madam complained every time she saw me. I left a streak of wax on the tabletop. I tracked in mud. I faced a china dog towards the door after I dusted it, which would cause the family's luck to run out. And at the end of every scolding, I cast down my eyes and I said, "Yes, madam." I kept careful track of her the same way I used to mind the neighbor's bull when I took the milk cows out of the pasture. She had not hit me again, but always seemed on the edge of it. Mostly Madam slept late, wrote letters, and picked out melodies on a badly tuned spinet. A few times she and her husband conversated fast and quiet about Mr. Washington and when the king's ships would arrive for the invasion. They argued fierce on Thursday night, and Lockton shouted and called Madam rude names before storming out of the house, the front door crashing behind them. I vowed not to cross either of them again. Madam went to bed early that night, and so did we. Ruth snuggled next to me and fell asleep quick, and I lay awake, praying hard, but gaining little comfort. I was lost. I knew that we were in the cellar of a house on Wall Street, owned by the Locktons in the city of New York. But it was like looking at a knot, knowing it was not a knot, but not knowing how to untie it. I had no map for this life. I lay awake and I stared into the darkness. Madam called for tea in her bedchamber the next morning and sent for Ruth, who was pumping the butter churn with vigor. Why would she need Ruth? I asked as I wiped my sister's hands and face with a damp rag. Why does she do anything? Becky asked. I'm to climb to the attic to fetch the cast-off clothing in an old trunk. Maybe she'll set the little one to rip out stitches so the dressmaker can use the fabric. This best be the last of the day's fanciful notions. My knees don't like all this upping and downing of the stairs. Ruth stayed in Madam's chamber for hours. I spilled the fireplace ashes on the kitchen floor, then kicked over the bucket of wash water I brought in to clean up the mess. I stubbed my toe, I near cut off my finger whilst peeling an old tough turnip. And when I could stand it no more, I snuck out of the kitchen and I tiptoed down the hall. I could hear the sound of Madam's voice from the bottom of the stairs, but not the words she was saying. I wanted to march up there and tell Ruth to come back and finish the butter. I did not. I forced myself to work. Becky took a tray of cookies and a pot of tea upstairs late in the afternoon. I pounced when she returned to the kitchen. Is Ruth well? Why does Madam keep her? Becky chose her words with care. Madam has taken a liking to your Ruth on account of her being so tiny and quiet. She sat at the kitchen table. She means to use her for a personal maid. Pardon me? Most of Madam's friends have a slave to split wood and carry chamber pots like you, but if Madam has a slave dressed in finery, well, that makes her more of a lady. Ruth can fan her when she's hot or stir the fire when she's cold. I forgot myself and sat down across from Becky. She's making Ruth into a curiosity? Becky nodded. Hey, that's a good word for it. I went cold with anger, then hot, then cold again. It wasn't right. It wasn't right for one body to own another or pull strings to make them jump. Why was Madam allowed to hit me or to treat Ruth like a toy? Take care, Becky warned, pointing at my lap. I looked down. My hands were clenched into fists so tight the cords that held my bones together could be seen. I released them. Becky leaned across the table and spoke quiet. I don't imagine you like this much. Can't say I blame you. But don't lose your head. Madam is not afraid to beat her slaves. I rubbed my palms together. Do they own more than us? Half a dozen down at the Charleston place, none up in Boston. Never been to Carolina, so I don't know how they get along. But you need to calm yourself and heed what I am about to tell you. Yes, ma'am, I said stiffly. 2-3 years ago, there was another girl here, slave like you. She talked back. Madam called her surly and took her to beating her regular. One day she beat her with a fireplace poker. Did she die? No, but her arm broke and didn't heal right. It withered and hung useless, so Madam sold her. She best not come after me with a poker or hurt Ruth. Becky leaned back and steadied on me a bit. You ain't never going to say something like that again. Not in my kitchen. I get paid decent here, and I won't let some girl like you get in the way of that. Wearing pretty dresses ain't going to hurt the little one, so wipe that look off your face and fetch me some more wood. And after that, Ruth's every waking moment was spent with Madam. Though we worked in the same house and slept under the same blanket, we had little time to talk. Ruth was permitted to sleep until the sun rose went to bed when Madam retired, and rarely had to work in the kitchen or garden. I lay awake every night, heart filled with dread, recalling the dangerous offer made by the boy in the floppy red hat. So that was the end of chapter 8. So we know now that what is happening with Isabel. Ruth has now become sort of Mrs. Luckton's play toy, I guess. She keeps her company. Isabel's not too fond of that idea, but she really doesn't have any choice. Becky's been smart at keeping her mind focused and to make sure that she doesn't do anything crazy, because Isabel does have that streak in her, that stubbornness and that very fiery will. So we'll have to see what happens in chapter 9. Thanks. Bye. Chapter 9 from Chains by Laurie Halse Anderson. I was struck at the back steps with a pile of dull knives and a whetstone. It was jury job. First, spit on the stone. Next, hold the knife at the proper angle and circle it against the stone. 10 to the left, 10 to the right, until the blade was sharp enough to slice through a joint of beef like it was warm butter. As I sharpened, I imagined using the knife to cut through the ropes that tied us to New York. I'd slice through the ocean, and Ruth and me would walk on the sand all the way home, 10 circles to the left. Ruth was above stairs, standing by whilst Madam prepared herself for company. The master was locked in his library. Becky was somewhere in the crowd watching General Washington parade down Broadway with 5 regiments of soldiers. The sounds of beating drums and whistling fifes and cries of huzzah, huzzah blew towards me from the rooftop. I pushed everything out of my mind save my task, 10 circles to the right. Becky came back from the parade an hour later, overflowing with stories. She nattered on about the spectacle whilst assembling the tea things for Madam and Lady Seymour, who had come to call again. I pretended to listen. Truth be told, I didn't even notice when she left carrying the tray. 10 circles to the left, 10 circles to the right, all make the blade sharp and mighty. 10 circles to the left, 10 to the right. Becky called for me twice before I heard her proper, and her voice was high and tight. I said to hurry. You want to get put on the streets? Madam wants you in the parlor. The knife near slipped from my hand. Is it Ruth? No, the Lady Seymour wants to see you, and the master just arrived with gentlemen friends all calling for food and drink, so hurry. I washed up in the cold water bucket, quickly pinned on a clean apron, checked my kerchief was proper on, and followed Becky to the parlor. She rapped lightly on the door and pushed it open. The new girl, ma'am, she said, setting a plate of fresh-baked strawberry tarts on the table. Show her in, Madam said. Becky waved at me to enter. Madam and an older woman sat at the table, but my eyes were drawn between them to my sister, dressed up in Madam's pretty pet, in a bleached linen shift, a navy blue brocade short gown, a full skirt patterned with lilies. When she saw me, she clenched her hands together and bit her lower lip. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. My belly went funny and my mind raced. Why had she been crying? Was she sick? Scared? Did Madam hurt her? Becky poked me gently in the back. This was not the time for questions. I quickly dropped into a curtsy, bowing my head, and when I stood up, the older woman, the lady aunt with all the money, gave me a shadow of a smile. She was smaller than Madam and wore a silk gown the color of a mourning dove and gray lace gloves. Her hair was curled high and powdered snow white. A necklace set with black stones shone from her neck. There were deep lines on the corner of her eyes and around her mouth, but I couldn't tell if they were from laughing or from crying. She turned in her hair and looked at Ruth. She sat back and then back at me. Are these two girls the sisters? Madam reached for a tart. Well, that's what the man said. The older woman sipped her tea. What is your name, girl? She asked. Isabel, ma'am. Isabel Finch. Ridiculous name, Madam said. She opened her fan and waved it all in front of her face. Now you're going to be called Sal Lockton now. It's much more suitable. I forced myself to breathe in as slow and regular instead of telling her that my name was not her affair. Yes, ma'am. She glanced at my feet. And you must wear your shoes. This is a house, not a barn. Ruth stepped out of the corner. Isabel. Madam snapped at the fan shut and rapped it against the edge of the table, startling us all. What did I tell you about silence? She reffed roughly. Ruth raised one shaking finger to her mouth and said, shh. Precisely. Madam set the fan in her lap and reached for a piece of sugar with her silver tongs. When she plopped it into the cup, the tea overflowed into the saucer. Ruth stood there like a carved statue, her fingers still held to her lips. I took another breath slower than the first and tried not to think on the newly sharpened knives on the kitchen step. Lady Seymour curled her fingers around the teacup, her gaze marking first Madam, then Ruth, then me. She said nothing. Would you like Sal to serve you and Lady Seymour while I wait on the gentleman? Becky said. Absolutely not. Show her to the library and make sure the men are fed, and bring fresh tea. This has already gone cold. We curtsied and left the parlor. Ruth's sad eyes followed me to the door. 10 circles to the left, 10 circles to the right. All make the blade sharp and mighty. Back in the kitchen, Becky took a large silver tray off the shelf pantry. Hold this. She loaded the tray with plates of cold sliced tongue, cheddar cheese, brown bread, and a bowl of pickles. I could not stop thinking about the way Ruth had jumped when Madam shouted, nor the tears in her eyes. Becky took a second tray and set it upon 4 goblets, 2 bottles of claret wine, and crock of mustard. She swung the kettle back over the fire to heat up more water, picked up the tray with the wine, and said, Hop to. I followed to the front of the house. But what about my shoes? The master won't notice as long as he gets his grub. Becky balanced the edge of the tray on her hip and knocked on the door right in front of the front hall. When a deep voice answered it, she opened. Lockton looked up as we entered. Oh, good sustenance, he said, pushing aside a stack of papers to clear off his desk. The room was the same size and shape of the parlor, but 2 of the walls had bookcases into them. A large painting of horses jumping over a high hedge hung on the 3rd wall. A thin layer of dust lay over everything. The front windows were open, bringing in fresh air and noise from the street. Carts rolling over the cobblestone and church bells in the distance mingled with the voices of 4 men who sat around the enormous desk. One man looked poorer than the others. The cuffs of his coats were frayed and his hands were stained with ink. And next to him sat a man with suspicious gray eyes and a liver-colored coat with a double row of gold buttons fastened over a large pudding belly. The 3rd man wore something on his head that looked more like a dead possum than a wig, but his coat was crisp and had new buckles on his shoes. They gleamed. The 4th was Master Lockton, looking like a cat who had just swallowed the last bite of a juicy mouse. Becky set her tray on the sideboard. I held mine as she poured the wine and served the gentleman. Then she told me she had me hold the food tray so that she could serve the tongue and cheese. They halted as the men started into their meal. Becky, Madam called from across the hall. Go see to her, Lockton told Becky. The girl can stay here. Does she know where the wine is? Yes, sir, I said. Becky and Lockton both stared at me. I had spoken out of my turn. My job was to be silent and follow orders. Ruth had already learned that. Shh. Keep the wine flowing and the plates full. My friends eat more at my table than their own. As Becky left, Gold Buttons drained his wine and then raised his goblet, and I hurried to pour him another and topped off the drinks of the other men. Lockton gave me a curt nod when I finished. Stand over there, he said, pointing to the corner where the 2 bookshelves met each other. I gave a wordless curtsy and took my place. The men dove back into the conversation. Who's been arrested because of the oath? Demanded Lockton. Fools, unschooled in the art of fence-sitting, said Gold Buttons. Plank walking, you mean? And said Inkstained. Shabbywig leaned forward and pointed his finger at Inkstained. Don't you turn the coward on us, not when we're this close. Close? Do you see His Majesty's ship in the harbor? I don't. I might argue that England has fled and the rebel traders have won. Lower your voice, Lockton said with a scowl. He closed the window with a loud bang and then returned to his seat. His Majesty's ships are very close, closer than you know. This rebellion will be smashed like glass under a heavy boot, and the king will be very grateful for our assistance. The mention of the king caught my ear. I studied the wide boards on the floor and listened with care. Gold Buttons popped a piece of cheese in his mouth and talked as he chewed. I sincerely hope you speak the truth, Elihu. These rebel committees are multiplying faster than rabbits in the spring. They've just about ground business to a halt. Have they interfered with you directly? Lockton asked. Every waking moment, Gold Buttons said. The latest bit of nonsense is a committee to detect conspiracies. They've sent hounds after us, old friend. Have you written to Parliament? They need the specifics of our difficulties. Parliament is far away as the moon, complained Inkstand. As the other men argued about Parliament and letters of protest and counter letters and counter letters, Shabbywig stabbed the last piece of tongue on his plate and shoved them into his mouth. He turned in his seat to look at me, held up his plate, and grunted. If I had ever done such a thing, Mama would have switched my behind for having the manners of a pig. Even Miss Mary Finch had asked with a please and a thank you when Mama served her dinner. This is New York, I reminded myself as I crossed the room and took the plate from his hand. The rules are different. I loaded his plate down with the last slices of tongue and set it in front of him before retreating to my corner. Everything is different. My belly growled and grumbled in this cage. The smell of the tongue and mustard and the cheese filled the room and made my mouth water. I had eaten a bowl of corn mush at sunrise and only dumplings at midday. To distract the beast in my gullet, I tried to read the names of the books on the shelves without turning my head. My eyes were starved for words as the rest of me was starved for dinner. It was really hard to read from the side like that. I wanted to pull down a book and open it proper and gobble up page after page. I wanted to stare into the faces of the men and demand they take me home. I wanted to jump on the horse in the painting and fly over the hills. Most of all, I wanted to grab my sister by the hand and run as fast as we could until the cobblestones disappeared and there was a dirt under our feet again. Girl, bring us more bread, sliced thin, and some of Becky's apricot jam. I've missed the taste of that. I curtsied and hurried out of the room, leaving the door open a crack, and I could easily open it when I came back with my hands full. And across the hall came the quiet conversation of Madame and Lady Seymour. I paused but heard no mention of Ruth. Shh. There was fresh bread on the kitchen table, but it took a piece of time for me to find the crock of jam. I used one of my sharp knives to slice the loaf and set out the slices on clean plates, and I put the plate and jam on a tray. It was taking me too long to finish a simple chore. I feared the master would be angry with me, and I was angry at myself for being afraid. I was just about to push open the library door with my foot when the master said, "Compliments of His Majesty, gentlemen. There's enough money here to bribe half of the rebel army." I stopped and peered through the crack. Madame's linen chest, the one that had been fussed over when we arrived, was in the middle of the library floor, the top thrown open, and underskirts and shifts were heaped on the floor beside it. Lockton reached into the chest and pulled out 2 handfuls of paper currency. "Huzzah!" said Inkstand as Goldbuttons let out a low whistle. "Do you have a man ready?" Lockton said. 2, Shabbywig answered. "One will operate out of Corby's tavern, the other from the Highlander." Good. Lockton crossed back to his desk. I could no longer see him, but his words were clear. Every man willing to switch side is to be paid 5 guineas and 200 acres of land. If he has a wife, an additional 100 acres. Each child of his blood garners another 50. "Make me want to marry the next lady I clap my eyes on," Goldbutton said. Lockton chuckled. I gave the door a little push and it swung open. "Sir?" I asked in a hushed voice. "Enter," Lockton said. I walked in and the other men did not look my way. I was invisible to them until they needed something. "Jam," he said with a smile. "Put it right here." I placed the tray in front of him and took my place again in the corner. The men spread the jam on the bread and drank their wine, discussing politics and wars and armies over the stacks of money on my master's desk. The smell of apricots filled the warm room. It put me in mind of the orchards down the road from Miss Mary's place. I kept my face still as a plaster mask, but inside my brain pan, thoughts chased around and round. By the time the men rose to leave, I knew what I had to do. So Isabel has been led into the library where the meeting is happening, where the Tories, are actually talking about taking down the rebels. So she's learned a lot of information at this point because they think of her as being invisible, just part of the bookcase. So at this point, Isabel has big decisions to make. Curzon was right. They will talk in front of her. And how much will she say and how much can she pass along to the rebel army without getting caught? So we find out next chapter 10 where that goes. Thank you. Hi, so today we're going to read chapter 10 of Chains by Laurie Halse Anderson. Thursday, June 6, 1776. Lady Seymour was the first to leave, followed soon after by the gentlemen in the library. Lockton and Madame retired upstairs, releasing Ruth for the evening and leaving me with the cleaning up. For supper, we ate the remainders from the plates of Inkstand and Goldbuttons, cold tongue and brown bread. Ruth ate 3 bites, then laid her head down on the table. When Becky left for the night, I held my sister's hand and walked her down to the steep stairs. Our bed was a thin mattress stuffed with old corn husks in front of a potato bin. I helped her out of her skirt and removed my own. Just before I blew out the candles, I asked, "Why were you crying in the parlor today, before Becky and me came in? Did Madame hurt you?" Her eyes puddled with tears and she shook her head from side to side. No fooling. Did you play or fuss? Was Madam angry with you? Did she hit you? She sniffed and wiped her nose on the sleeves of her shift. Shh, she said again. That wretched woman beat Ruth. I just knew it. She would beat Ruth into total silence if I let her. I kissed her tears and we knelt to pray. When we finally laid down, my fingers felt along the edge of my blanket, looking for the rip that Mama had sewed up with tiny feather stitches. She wouldn't let anyone hurt her children. Where's my baby? Ruth muttered, half asleep. She asked this every night. That bad man stole your doll, baby, I reminded her. The skinny one who stole us. He took everything. Everything? I hugged her close. Almost everything. But I'll get it back. Don't worry. You just go to sleep now. I can't sleep without my baby. There was a stubborn note in her voice. I'll make you another doll, I promise, but not tonight. Want me to sing to you? I didn't wait for an answer, but started in on an island lullaby that Mama had loved. Ruth lay quiet, her breath steady and slow, and by the time the song was over, she was fast asleep. I waited a full hour until the clock struck 11, and then slipped out from under the blanket and put my skirt back on. I did not stuff my feet into my shoes. I'd be faster and quieter without them. I climbed up the cellar stairs, freezing with every groan of the old wood. If Madame Lockton or Lockton came across me, I'll say that I'm on my way to the privy. They wouldn't be angry about that. A body must follow the call of nature, even in the dead of night. The kitchen was so dark I walked slowly, my hands feeling in front of me so I wouldn't bump into the table or knock over a pitcher on the sideboard. I paused at the back door. The sound of Lockton's snoring came from above, like faraway thunder. I'm on my way to the privy, I reminded myself. No harm in that. I carefully opened the door and I stepped outside. Ooh, sorry. The night air was crisp and smelled faintly of salt, and I tiptoed down the back steps and flew past the privy and around the side of the house to the gate, which hid in the shadows. My heart pounded so loud I felt sure it would wake the entire street. I had only to open the gate latch and step out. My hand wouldn't move. If I opened the gate, I would be a criminal. Slaves were not allowed out after sunset without a pass from their master. Anyone who caught me would take me to jail. If I opened the gate, a judge would order me flogged. If I opened the gate, there was no telling what punishment Madame would demand. If I opened the gate, I might die of fright. If I leaned my head against the gate. I could not open the gate, but I had to open the gate. This house was not a safe place. I had to get us out, but there was no way to get out. No way to run away off an island, no way to run off with a little girl. The secret of Madame's linen chest was the only key I held. Watch over me, Mama. I opened the latch, slipped out the gate, and I ran. I thought it would be easy. I would run straight to the shed behind Bellingham's house, tap on Curzon's window and tell him the news, and hurry home. It was nighttime after all, and folks would be asleep. Not in New York, in a city occupied by the Continental Army. At the end of the block, there were soldiers on watch in front of City Hall, a dozen or so men standing around a campfire with more dozing on the ground. One man was trying to read a letter by the firelight, another was roasting a small piece of meat at the end of a stick. Their guns were close to hand, and I crept as close as I dared, but there was no way to sneak past them. I swallowed hard, and I turned around to head west, away from the firelight. The next corner was dark and lonesome, and I turned south, then west again, and then I was forced north for 3 blocks by loud soldiers spilling out of taverns. The crowded buildings confuddled me. I tried to be brave like Mama or Queen Esther in the Bible, but I knew there were hobgoblins walking in the dark, looking to steal the breath from a girl's body. I hid when I heard voices and when a horseman galloped down the middle of the street. The horse's hooves sparked off the cobblestone and sounded like a hammer striking a forge. I chased up and down the streets and alleys, sticking to the shadows and shying away from the flickering streetlights. I ran. Finally, the street emptied out onto the wharf, and I'd reached one of the 2 rivers that sheltered New York Island, but I couldn't tell if I was looking at East River or the North. I ventured out farther into the street. Relaxed men told out loud jokes to each other on the waterfront. A tin whistle played, and a small dog yipped. The masts of ships grew thicker to my right. That was my heading. The shapes of the buildings and the outlines of the wharves soon became familiar. There was a dock the Hearthstone had tied to, and there was Bellingham's building. I snuck down the alley to the shed without window that Curzon described. This was the end of my quest. I took a deep breath, I said a prayer, and I rapped on the glass. And nothing happened. I started to rap again, and then I stopped. What if this is the wrong window? The wrong house? What if this person within thinks me a thief in the night or a murderess? What if? Country? A puzzled voice called for me from the shadows to the back of the end of the tavern a few buildings down. Every window in the tavern was lit up, and the air loud with the angry shouts of men deep in argument. Are you speaking to me? I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. What are you doing here? Curzon stepped out of the shadows and motioned for me to join him. I dashed towards him, keeping to the edge of the tavern candlelight. I have news. Of Lockton? And more. I quickly told him everything I had seen and heard. Is the money still there? He finally asked. A portion, I said. The gentleman took some with them, but Lockton placed the rest back in the chest. Then I was sent to fetch more wine, and the chest was gone upon my return. He nodded gravely. Will this be enough to send us home? I asked. Can they get us on a ship tomorrow? I have to take Ruth. I can have Ruth at the docks by sunup. He raised both of his hands. Go home and sleep. I'll take your news to Master Bellingham. I expect the committee will visit Lockton tomorrow. But whatever you do, don't let on that you were the informant. Why not? I asked. How else can I claim what's mine? The colonel will know who you are and how to find you. Until you hear from him, you're just the new Lockton girl. But not for long, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Not for long, he agreed. Go home now. I hesitated. I don't know how long I got lost coming here. He chuckled softly. It's easy enough once you know the way. He gave me the directions. Thank you, I said, picking up my skirts. Thank you for everything. Go quick. When I was halfway up the alley, he called after me. Ho, there, country. What? Well done. And that was the end of chapter 10. So Isabel in this chapter has really made her decision. We knew at the end of chapter 9 that she knew what she had to do when she was in the library and listening to the four men talk about their plans to be against the rebels. So she knew at that moment that this may be her ticket to freedom. After seeing Ruth crying with Mrs. Lockton and knowing how she treats her, she really, really wants to get out of there at risk of her own life. So she makes it to Curzon and shares some news with him. We'll find out in chapter 11 what happens next. Thanks. Hi, so today we're going to read chapter 11 of Chains by Laurie Halse Anderson. Friday, June 7th, 1776. It felt like Becky shook me awake the moment I fell asleep. Make haste, girl, she hissed. You didn't start the fire. Why are you still abed? Haste? That was the word of the day. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't catch up. It didn't help that Madame was in a mood. Girl, she said to me as I prepared to sweep the kitchen floor, the bedding needs to be aired. Yes, ma'am. I set the broom back against its place and went upstairs, and when I stripped off the bedding, carried it outside and pegged it to the line. Just as I finished, Madame opened the back door. Why are you dawdling so? She yelled. The floor in here is filthy, and the banister needs to be polished, and I told you to wear your shoes in my house. After I squeezed my feet into those small, dreadful shoes, it was back to the sweeping, and then the polishing of the banister with soft rags and beeswax scented with lemon. And when I made it halfway up the stairs, Madame yelled at me for airing the bed linen on a day that threatened rain. At least she did not call for Ruth's company. Becky had set my sisters to scrubbing the back steps. Ruth hummed so loudly, it put me in a mind of a swarm of bees in a clover. As I gathered in the sheets, I watched the gate, waiting for the rebels to arrive to arrest the Locktons and reward me with our liberty. We would be given proper cabins on the ship, I was sure of it. No more riding in the hold with barrels of salt cod. Ruth and me would have a cabin fit for ladies, with bunks and blankets and pillows and 3 meals every day. Yes, indeed, that was our future. Aren't you done yet? Becky yelled from the back door. We have to prepare the drawing room. I shook away my daydreams. The drawing room on the second floor wasn't a room where folks sat with paints and colored chalks to draw pictures, like I'd figured. It was another parlor 3 times the size of the one downstairs. We removed the sheath coverings off the furniture. A dozen chairs with needleworked seats were scattered around the room, organized around tables with delicate legs. A low settee stood in front of the fireplace, and a mirror framed in mahogany hung above the mantel, flanked by oil lamps fastened to the walls. Why this room has to be prepared is beyond me, Becky muttered as we folded the sheets together. No staff to speak of, the larder half empty, the city getting ready to explode, and she wants this turned out and polished. Of all the foolish... A loud beating on the front door interrupted her. Dash it all! Becky exclaimed as she clattered down the stairs. "Keep folding," she called to me. Not for love or nor money, I peered out a front window. The group of men clustered on the front steps did not look like angels, but they could have been in disguise. 4 wore the coats, breeches, powdered wigs, and hats of merchants. 1 had papers tucked under his arm. 6 soldiers stood behind them, all wearing uniforms, but carrying long metal bars instead of guns. Becky opened the door and the men filed inside. I stepped out into the hall and peered down the stairs, and the man with the papers under his arm had removed his hat. It was Master Bellingham. My heart sank. A door slammed overhead as Madame flew out of her chamber. "What is the meaning of this?" I pressed myself against the wall so they could rush by me, then followed her down the stairs. The soldiers had split into 2 groups. Half went into the front parlor, the other half into Lockton's library. Both groups set to removing the windows, prying them out of their casings with long bars. "What are you doing to my windows?" Madame demanded. Bellingham approached her. "No need to fret, ma'am. We are all called to make sacrifices." Bellingham approached her. Sacrifices?" Master Lockton had also hurried in. "This is thievery. What right do you have to destroy my home?" There was a horrific crash in the parlor as the hooks that held up the heavy draperies flew off the wall and landed on the floor. Plastered dust swirled. Bellingham removed the papers under his arm. "You surprise me, Elihu," he said. "I thought a patriot such as yourself would welcome the chance to contribute to the army." Beads of sweat stood at the edge of Lockton's wig. "How does that pertain to the ripping down of my house, James?" Bellingham patted Lockton's shoulder. "We need your lead, friend, for ammunition. Good people throughout the city are donating all the lead they own. The Provincial Congress will compensate you, of course, in due time. I've invoices prepared." Madame frowned. "How is it possible to turn windows into bullets?" "The counterweights are made of lead, ma'am, and your drapery pulls." "This is an outrage," Lockton fumed. "No, Elihu," Bellingham said. "This is war. Even our churches are making the sacrifice, delivering their bells to be recast as cannons. Surely you do not rate your home above the house of God." The soldiers left the library, deposited the lead weights by the front door, and headed up to the 2nd floor, knocking their shoulders against the paintings of the Lockton's ancestors that lined the staircase. I wanted to shout that they should search for the money in the linen chest, but instead I shrank against the wall to let them pass. "They haven't restored the windows to the frames," protested Lockton. "What are they doing?" Madame asked. "There are plenty of carpenters who will assist you with the windows if you don't feel you're up to the task yourself, Elihu," Bellingham said. "Sir," shouted a soldier upstairs, "we found it!" Bellingham dropped his manners and bounded up the stairs 2 at a time. Madame and Lockton followed close up on his heels, and I trailed behind. The bedchamber was a large room made small by the 4-poster canopy bed that sat in a high carriage. 2 massive armoires, a half-dozen men with red faces. Madame had once again set herself on the walnut chest, which sat in front of the hearth. Why was it up here? "Of all the insults, of all the assaults on the dignity of a woman," she said to Bellingham, "this, sir, is the lowest, the most base." "I shall see to it that every leader in the land knows—" "Madam," Bellingham said sternly, "if you do not take your person from that chest, I shall order these soldiers to remove you." "You would not dare," she said. "Oh, yes, he would, dear," Lockton said. "Please, wife, let these men do their work with no further delay. There is nothing to worry about." He seemed to hide a message beneath those words, for Madame relaxed and stood with grace. "If you insist, my husband," she said. "Perhaps you would prefer to go below stairs. The girl can heat some wine to calm your nerves." Madame shook her head. "No, dear, I shall remain by your side." Bellingham gave the sergeant a quick nod, and the man knelt in front of the chest and opened the latch. "Deliverance! They're going to arrest them both and reward me mightily. We'll leave this horrid place by sunset." One corner of Lockton's mouth turned up in a sly smile as a blushing soldier removed the shifts and underskirts. My heart skipped a beat. Why were dirty linens still in there? Becky gathered all the washing yesterday. The soldier looked up at Bellingham. "That's all, sir, clear down to the bottom." I wanted to shout, "No, the money! It's underneath the false bottom!" But I pressed my lips together. Bellingham knelt and checked it for himself, knocking the wood sides. Lockton's grin had spread to both sides of his mouth. "Would you dare to inspect all our clothing, James? Perhaps you'd send a man to root through the potatoes and the parsnips in the cellar." He had hidden the money somewhere else. That's why he was at ease. Bellingham rose to his feet and stood with his hands behind him. Would he turn on me, accuse me of making a false report, and expose me to the Locktons?
No. He searched through his papers until he pulled out one and he handed it to Lockton. You're summoned to the New York Provincial Congress for suspicion of aiding the enemy. Elihu, I am placing you under arrest. These soldiers will escort you. He nodded his head and 2 soldiers grabbed Lockton by his elbows and his smile vanished. Wait, Madam said, you can't arrest him, he's done nothing. To the contrary, ma'am, he has put the lives of thousands in jeopardy. The men filed by me without another word, and Bellingham kept his face straight ahead as he passed by. He cut his eyes at me. They drilled a hole right into my fear of discovery. There was the clatter of boots on the stair threads, then boots on the marble steps outside, and then the crash of the front door slamming. They were gone. Madam stared blankly at the empty doorway. Ma'am, I asked quietly. Her eyes turned to me and she blinked, as if suddenly realized who I was and where she stood. Don't just stand there, girl. These linens need to be washed. I can't think how Becky missed them. I shall speak to her about her laziness. And then she fainted. So, we know that Bellingham was looking for the chest that Isabel told Curzon about. Obviously, there's someone who leaked that information to Lockton because he was able to move the money before the soldiers arrived, much to Isabel's dismay. But in the end, he still does get arrested, and we're not sure where this leaves Isabel at this point. We'll find out in chapter 12. Thank you. Hi, today we're going to read chapter 12 in Chains by Laurie Halse Anderson. Friday, June 7th, 1776. Becky sent me to fetch the Lady Seymour to help Madam get through having her husband arrested like that. The old lady lived 2 blocks north of Trinity Church, the one with spires that scraped the sky. It's one of them old Dutch-style houses. She's got a red door and a knocker that looks like a heart, Becky said. You can't miss it. The house was not far from City Hall, along a street where soldiers with heavy axes were chopping down the row of tall poplar trees. Fortifications, a soldier explained to a cartman, to protect against the invasion. Any day now, they say. The red door made the house easy to find. I walked through a beautiful garden around to the back. Neatly trimmed boxwood hedges created a path lined with young betony plants, lavender, daylilies, and honeysuckle. Mama would have admired the roses. My fingers itched to pluck up the straggly weeds that were crowding them, but I dare not. I knocked at the back. The door was opened by the whitest girl I've ever seen. Her skin was pale as water except for 2 flame-colored spots on her cheeks. Her eyebrows and eyelashes were near invisible, and her eyes a mix of pewter and blue. She wiped her hands on her apron and said something I didn't understand. I've come for the Lady Seymour, I explained. Madame Lockton requires her presence. She frowned. Wait, will you? What did you say? I asked. Een ogenblik alsjeblieft, she said before she closed the door in my face. What was an ogenblik? New York was stranger every day passing. I knocked again, but there was no answer. I was about to walk home when I heard Lady Seymour's voice through an open window, and a moment later the door opened and she stood there in the kitchen. I curtsied proper-like. Pardon, ma'am, but they've arrested the master, and Madam is poorly. She nodded. They've been hunting loyalists all day. I told Hand it would come to this. Come inside, child Isabel, is it not? The kitchen was larger than the Locktons, with a tiled hearth and copper pots hanging on the wall. A smoke-colored cat curled itself around my ankles, its tail the shape of a question mark. Please sit down. You must be hungry. I perched on the edge of a chair. Lady Seymour poured me a mug of fresh milk. My surprise at having a proper lady to do so have shown on my face. You could use some building up, she said as she pushed a plate of molasses cookies to me. Eat and tell me everything. She turned to her servant who stood by the hearth. Will Sie alsjeblieft even die Möbels afstoffen? Sorry about that, that's probably really bad. The strange girl bobbed once and left the room, the pale pink ribbons from the back of her cap trailing behind her. She speaks only Dutch, Lady Seymour explained, and shows no inclination to learn English, I'm afraid. Now, a bite, and then the events. I chewed the cookie quickly, took a sip of milk, and recounted near everything, though I neglected to mention my role as the household spy. She listened carefully as I spoke and asked plenty of questions. Did Elihu say anything to the men who arrested him? Did he give them any names? Not in my hearing, ma'am. She sat back in her chair. He's in no danger as long as he stays silent. She broke off a piece of cookie, popped it in her mouth, and chewed. I imagine Anne is in a ladder. Yes, ma'am, I said carefully. She told Becky to pack the trunks for Charleston. Lady Seymour shook her head. I don't blame her, but fleeing would ensure that the rebels would take everything. Yes, ma'am, I mumbled. I took an overly large bite of the cookie, certain she would send me back straight away. She tapped her forefinger on the table as she pondered, her rings flashing in the light. Right, she said firmly, having come to a decision. I will write a note for you to take to the lawyer's office before you go, and another for Anne, telling her that Eliel will soon be free. The Dutch girl came back in the kitchen and said something I couldn't make out at all, and Lady Seymour rose from her chair and motioned for me to stay seated. Finish those cookies, please, and drink a second glass of milk. You can't run errands for me unless properly nourished. So, Isabel runs the errand to Miss Lady Seymour, and we know that she's a much kinder lady than Miss Lockton is. She feeds her milk and cookies, and she sits and listens to what she has to say. So we know right now what kind of character she is, and she's explained the situation that Mr. Lockton has been arrested and will now be in jail, and Miss Lockton is in a tizzy because he's in jail and she wants to leave. The Lady Seymour explains to her that that would be a really bad idea, because if she does, then the rebels will take everything in her house. So she needs to stay, which I'm sure she's not going to be happy about, but we will hear more about that in chapter 13. Thank you. Hi, so today we're going to read chapter 13 from Chains by Laurie Halse Anderson. Saturday, June 8th to Friday, June 21st, 1976. The front door opened the next morning and I walked down the stairs carrying Madame's chamber pot. It was Master Lockton back from being arrested. His clothing was rumpled and he looked as if he'd not slept. He paused when he saw me. Tell Becky I require strong coffee and food. Where is your mistress and what is she doing? Above, sir. I gripped the handle of the chamber pot tightly. Packing. He stormed past me, bellowing for his wife. As I dumped and washed out the chamber pot, I gave thanks. 'Twas clear he did not think me a spy. When I went back inside, there came a ruckus and much shouting from the second floor. I joined Ruth and Becky at the foot of the staircase, the three of us listening with big ears as Lockton and Madame shouted at each other. Shh, Ruth said, putting her fingers to her lips. That's right, little one, said Becky. They don't pipe down soon. The whole neighborhood will turn out to watch. Crash! Bet you that was the wash pitcher, she said. Crash! And the basin, she added. Do they often fight like this, I asked. Often enough, Becky said. She stopped as Madame cried out in pain. The master likes to be obeyed. He's not happy she wants to head for Charleston, and she don't want to stay here. Lockton lowered his voice some, but he was still angry and scolding. Should we do something, I asked. Perhaps Lady Seymour should calm him. Becky shook her head. 'Twould fire him up even more. Best not to get to discuss these things. Ruth stuck her thumb in her mouth. Once the fighting had ended and the master had been served his meal, I took a cool compress and mug of cold ale up to Madame, and she applied the compress to her swollen, split lip. She scolded me for not scraping the candle wax that had dripped on the floor. It caused me to fall, she said. Do you see what your clumsiness has cost me? We both knew it was a lie. There was no wax on the floor, and a few drops of blood stained the edge of the carpet. What do you have to say for yourself, she asked. I didn't like picking up the blame and carrying it, but I had no choice. I bowed my head. I beg forgiveness, ma'am, and promise it will never happen again. She removed the compress and winced. It had better not. In the weeks that followed, the master had me serve him whenever his companions visited. I listened closely to their conversating, but they blew only hot air, complaining about the Congress and the weather and the effects of war on business. I was relieved to hear that the printer, ink-stained, had fled the city with his wife and children. Lockton was certain that he had told the rebels about the money and the plan to bribe the American troops. My secret was safe. Becky brought back peas, greens, and gossip from the marketplace. The British fleet was in the harbor. No, the fleet had sailed for Jamaica. No, the Congress had negotiated a peace. No, the British planned to kill us all while we slept. Gossip is the foul smell from the devil's backside. That's what Mama always said. I tried to ignore the wild stories and stay alert for something, anything that I might need to secure my freedom. Becky had been quite happy to give me the chore of hiking up to the tea water pump every day, and after my first few visits, it became the favorite part of my day. The pump was set on in a little shed at the edge of the common, a big gathering place ringed by army barracks, the poorhouse, and the jail. There were trees and fields to the north of the common and the burying place for Africans. The air was cleaner up there. It was easier to breathe. A week after Lockton's return home, Curzon stood with me in line with the servants waiting for water. I was desperate to ask him questions, but knew they had to wait until we were alone. When my turn came, I handed my buckets to the ancient slave who worked the pump handle, a man as old as dirt. With stone gray hair and skin the color of night sky, he carried a country mark on his face, 3 straight lines that had been cut into his right cheek when he became a man in Africa. Papa had a mark like that. It looked close to it. It made me feel kin to the old man, and I smiled and I curtsied polite whenever I saw him. "Thank you, grandfather," Curzon said to the man as he handed the full buckets. I was surprised. "He's your grandfather? I didn't know that." The old man chuckled softly and he reached for the buckets of the girl standing behind me. "I'm the grandfather of everybody and everything." He pushed down on the handle of the pump and water flowed. Mind how you go, missy." Curzon waited until we were 2 blocks down Queen Street before he asked me about the Locktons' affairs. "He traveled to Fairfield in Connecticut 2 days ago and came home late last night," I said. "I thought he was on parole. I thought he had to stay in New York. Why don't they arrest him?" Curzon looked behind us and from side to side before answering. "They don't have enough men to follow him, and his aunt has powerful connections, both here and in England. There must be solid proof before they dare arrest him again. Should you ever come in possession of letters sent to him, or maps, or if I find the king hiding in our pantry," I interrupted. "The Congress would give you a medal for that," he said with a grin. "I would rather have passage home on a fast ship." "You don't want to sail anywhere, not now," he said, doffing his hat and bowing to the 3 officers passing on horseback. I likewise bobbed in the direction of the gentlemen and waited for them to draw out of earshot before I spoke again. "Why not? The royal fleet is fast approaching and is eager for battle and spoils. If you sailed now, you'd likely be captured and sold to the islands." "I don't gossip and pipe smoke," I said. "You hear it on every street corner. It's a wonder we don't all choke to death on it." "Where you see smoke, you'll find fire, country. Don't worry, the days of our liberty will soon dawn. This country is going to be free, and you and me with it. For a boy with a little head, you sure do have big dreams. I just want what's owned to me." "You need to be patient," he said with a frown. "The army has bigger fish to fry than you and your sister." "And I have bigger fish to fry than your army," I said with a whole lot more confidence than I truly felt. The sun set later and later in those weeks, and the extra light was welcome and put to good use. I aired out our pallet and blankets and tidied our cellar corner. The potato bin was near empty, and Ruth asked to play in it as if it was a little house. I would not let her. Instead, I made her a corn husk doll, painting a face on it with pokeberry juice and fashioning a gown for it with a piece of cambric from Becky's scrap bag. One night, feeling out of sorts and reckless, I crept up to the stairs. It was after midnight, and Lockton and his wife slept heavily. I snuck into the library and I took a book from the shelves, a story called Robinson Crusoe by Mr. Defoe. I sat by the glowing coals in the kitchen hearth and read until I could hold my eyes open no longer. When the fat moon rose the next night, I planted the mystery seeds I had taken from Mama's jar. I didn't know what they would grow into, but planting them deep in the cool dirt was a comfort. Thunder boomed in the distance and a summer storm approached. I ought check the cows, I thought. Storms made them nervous. More thunder rolled, and then a third wave. Fool, I scolded myself. The cows were in our old life, not this one. The moon climbed higher, and the air returned to stillness and waiting. I took myself to bed and did not dream. So in this chapter, we see that Isabella's met up with Curzon again, and she's just basically keeps feeding him information from the house, what's happening with the Locktons, what's being said. She desperately wants her freedom, so any information she hears, she just hopes that that's the piece that they're going to need to give her freedom. But as Curzon tells her, they have bigger fish to fry than her and her sister. So of course they're going to listen to the information, but they're not exactly a priority to the army. So she continues, and she continues to find information. She sneaks into the library and takes a book, which we all know that could be a very big mistake, but she just needs to read. Isabel is a slave that reads, and you could see in one of the chapters when she was in the library saying that she was starved for words just as much as her belly was starved for food, and she has her book now. Let's hope she doesn't get caught. Next we'll read chapter 14. Thank you.